Good morning, gentlemen. I'm back from the movie theater after having just watched Tron Ares. That's kind of incredible to say that you've watched Tron Ares, a new Tron movie in 15 years actually. Well, I promised myself that before anything else, before any kind of review, positive or negative about the movie, any kind of endorsement or even bashing of this movie, I will once again have a disclaimer. Yeah. So, it's a separate question, I think, to talk about if I have supported these actions by watching Tron Ares. I have justified it to myself by deciding that any time that I ever talk about this movie, recommend it to anyone or don't recommend it to anyone, anytime, I will always point this thing out, because this is genuinely important to know before you watch the movie so you can make an informed decision for yourself. That being said, I liked Tron Ares. I think it was very good. At some things, yeah. At some things, no. Your standards of very good will be most likely very different to mine. At some things, at least. But I do think that it was generally an enjoyable, good time, and there were no sufficiently big flaws that I would take issue with, that I would have to point out here. There was no, it wasn't any kind of Quantumania level of messing up a big blockbuster movie. There was no an overarching bad, huge problem with it. I think first I will talk about spoiler-free stuff. First and foremost, I will have to talk about, as apparently everyone is obligated to, about the visuals and the score. 9 Inch Nails was incredible, as was expected of the first and only song that I heard from them before I watched the movie. It's not as good as Daft Punk. I will say it right now, even though they aren't comparable in their purposes between these two movies. They are trying to achieve completely different tones and feelings in the viewer, so it's not completely fair to make the comparison. But at the same time, they are quite clearly emulating Daft Punk, and Daft Punk still cannot be beaten. This is a great soundtrack, one of the best I've heard from any movie ever, still not quite as good as Legacy. And that kind of applies to the entire movie in some way, because the rest of my pros and cons are both related very much to Legacy. This is a very similar movie in some ways and not in other ways. And the visuals is another thing about it, because if you look at it again, from a bird's eye view, from from an outsider's perspective, these films appear to be very similar. But I feel like the grid has less personality in this one, not just because we don't explore it quite much in this movie, which is again an issue I think with this movie. I think the grid became a bit more of an aesthetic for this movie. Obviously it has always had an aesthetic which is appealing to many people in all of these movies, but specifically in Tron Ares I feel like it's just something cool to look at. When in the first two movies it was the entire point of watching the movie, that you were engrossed in this huge, expansive, magical world of science fiction for most of the runtime. In this movie, I don't think this is really a spoiler, but I don't think they're in the grid or in the grids for even 15 minutes of the 2-hour runtime. There's very little of the grid to see in this movie, and there's very few locations inside the grid for us to see. And I think that's also one of the biggest flaws with this movie, that even if you love Tron, it's going to be a bit hard to square the fact that the movie about going inside a computer and being a human user inside that computer is not something that you will find much in this movie. Users barely go inside the grid in this movie, and you can have more of an issue with that than I did, because the movie still does a lot of other good things. I'm 50-50 on that, because I do think it would still be better, and I don't that much see the appeal in bringing the grid to the real world that the filmmakers apparently have seen. I understand that they had their own vision for this and that they thought that there was some good reason to bring it into the real world, but aside from like a few kind of cool action set pieces, there's not really much reason for this movie to be like this. But I still really liked it, because it's still the same action, the same visuals, and the same level of quality and directing that we have grown accustomed to in the first two movies. And what we have also come accustomed to in these movies, in this franchise, is the exposition, which I think is also another huge issue with this movie. It's not like, it's bearable in the sense that if you can tune it out as like a popcorn flick, that apparently many have done, you don't really have to think about it much. But I can see like a brand new moviegoer going like, this I'm not reading all that. Like it has so much stuff that you do not need to have in this first movie of your like reboot of the franchise. It's so expository, and again, like we have had some of this in the trailer, so I don't think this is a spoiler. But Ares, Jared Leto's character, he's like this kind of emotionless killing machine that is supposed to like have no like attachment to emotion, at least in the beginning of the movie, and he like grows to learn how humans and emotions work. He's supposed to be like this very literal, very like cold, calculated assassin program, and I think that works well, but not when it's used as a crutch to defend or to excuse the exposition in this movie. But because most of the exposition in this movie is generally just Ares being like, oh yeah, I read this somewhere in a database, and this is what you are like. And one of the characters is literally described in their entirety in the movie by Ares just explaining their backstory. Which is, if I can be frank, kind of stupid. Does the director really genuinely think there's no other better way to explain what this character is like, but than just having the program who says everything literally, saying everything about her literally? It's kind of like playing into the idea that the audience is stupid. And maybe it's justified with the reputation that the audience has gotten with these Tron movies, with the audience constantly having criticized this franchise for being too unclear. Because obviously there's lots of like tech stuff which has to be explained for the first time for many people, like de-resing, resolution, the grid, the 3D printing like laser technology that is very much part of this movie, much more than in Legacy or even the first movie. So there's a lot on the movie's shoulders, and it can be in a sense excused for the fact that they have always had to do this. But for this time, they didn't try to like make it more diegetic in the entire environment itself, or for people to understand it on their own. It has to be spelled out like so egregiously obviously. Exposition is necessary for every movie that is ever made in like ever, basically. But you can't just have a character that says everything the way it is, and then that's just it. That's just like the everything that you need to know. Like, you could get into knowing that character without the exposition, and we do get to know the other protagonist in this movie, Eve Kim, without Ares trying to explain everything about her in excruciating detail. I felt like that was kind of annoying for a movie that otherwise pays so much reverence to the first two movies. Like, it takes so much of the information that we learned from the two movies for granted for super fans like me, who understand like when a coffee cup falling from a security guard's hands to the floor is a reference to something happening in Tron Legacy. Like, I love that stuff. It's incredibly fun how the director clearly loved Tron when they watched the movies, and those parts are very well made. Anytime the movie takes its audience seriously and doesn't try to hold their hand across every single scene, it's so good. But then there are these few scenes that try to fill so much damn exposition, and it's not necessary. It could be either shorter, it could be less obvious, it could be often cut entirely. But none of that happens in the movie. So I prefer the parts where there is no exposition, and I don't hate them, but I dislike the parts where they are using a stand-in for the audience to say everything that the audience needs to know. That's annoying. Looking forward, I think this is a very good stepping stone for the future of Tron. It's not perfect, Tron has never been perfect, my favorite movie is a 4 out of 5, I can admit that, but I think this is worth watching, especially if you have been burned out by Star Wars or other kind of sci-fi movies that get like annoyingly bloated with their like entire universe having to be explained by multiple Disney Plus shows, and it gets so annoying when you have to like keep up with all of that stuff and then it's not even good. I think honestly, I would say Tron Ares is probably better than the entire sequel trilogy of Star Wars, even combined, but especially even individually. It has so much more to say as a movie than any of the Star Wars sequels. I would say it's not as good or doesn't have as much to say as Legacy, but it's still very well made in certain aspects. But the exposition is an issue. Then I want to get into some spoiler territory, so please stop here if you want to actually watch the movie without any spoilers. I have 3 specific issues with the movie. Sam and Quora are not in it. If that didn't come as a surprise to you, because none of the trailers show them, that's good. They do not try to fake out Sam and Quora returning from Legacy. So if you were expecting them, they do not try to tease them appearing in this movie. However, at the end of the movie, Ares is searching for Quora and apparently sees her as like a compatriot. She is also a program who has had to learn to live in this new world, which I think is fascinating, and I don't quite understand why it couldn't be about her, this movie. But apparently Jared Leto pulled some strings and made him the protagonist, and I guess Disney just didn't want to continue the story of a movie that flopped 15 years ago, so they rather rebooted the movie a second time, which, you know, it's fine. Tron fans have gotten used to that by now. But then, another thing that was like suspiciously absent from Legacy, I thought first, were the ISOs, the isomorphic algorithms. That's a bit of an issue for me because obviously I love the concept of the ISOs, which, if not apparent from me talking right now, was probably apparent from my 20-minute video about it. But the ISOs, they do not appear in Tron. They do not try to conflate this already very bloated story with even more different types of programs. There is only really one type of program. I guess technically Ares is different because he's so much more developed than the others. But I think that the MacGuffin that everyone is trying to catch in the movie, the permanence code as it's called, is actually isomorphic code. And it has the capability to make isomorphic algorithms out of programs. So when Ares collects it at the end of the movie, I think he actually becomes an isomorphic algorithm. The most glaring, like, smoking gun that the permanence code is supposed to be the ISO code is that the isomorphic algorithm code is shown in Tron Legacy to be a digital DNA strand. And when we are shown it in Ares, the permanence code is also a strand of digital DNA, which I don't think would be necessary for the permanence code to appear like if it wasn't also supposed to literally make programs resemble humans more, just like the ISOs are kind of human in the way that they have evolved naturally. I do think that the ISOs are technically in this movie, but for some reason they have added like more setup into their concept so that they can be more elaborate, I guess, in a 4th movie. I guess if you were expecting ISOs, they are not in the movie, but they also kind of are as a concept, even though they have a different name and the use. That actually brings me to the fact that the movie constantly operates on these 29-minute timers. I really like the idea of these characters having to constantly move around with 29-minute timers during which they can move freely from place to place and do different things. And the main character, or one of the main characters, Ares, is obviously one of them programs that have to follow this timer, but also all of the enemies are. So then there's this kind of interesting game of cat and mouse where you have to time your attacks differently because you will only have less than half an hour to prepare for your attack and actually execute it. That was really interesting to me. That was like a very cool angle to take the action into, that there were these different timers that the characters had to respect. But then I think there was a little bit of a plot hole in the movie with the fact that apparently no one has ever entered the grid in Kevin's and Sam's absence. Apparently Sam also didn't tell anyone about the fact that you can enter the grid yourself, but also for some reason, even Julian Dillinger, who appears to be like an Elon Musk type, very like reckless, stupid billionaire who just wants all the fame and glory for himself, he never even attempted to sacrifice any humans to like check if you can digitize a person inside the grid, because every character, every user that goes inside the grid, and every person that gets told about the grid supporting human life is like so unbelievably surprised about the concept of that. I would assume that by this point, when they have had the laser technology for some time to like generate these things outside of the grid, no one ever thought about reversing the laser, well, just like Julian Dillinger does at the end of the movie. I just don't buy that. That's kind of a plot hole, at least in my opinion, in the movie storytelling. But at the end of the day, it didn't really bother me that much. In general, this movie, it's flawed, just like Tron has always been. And I talk about the flaws more in my review on Letterboxd. If you're interested, you can read more about my like more elaborate thoughts on the movie. But I can absolutely recommend this to you. I do understand if Jared Leto's inclusion in this movie is a deal breaker for you. I will never judge anyone for doing so, because he has done some, I'll say, fucked up stuff, and that's not okay. I think making a review about this movie, having this disclaimer in front of it, I think that's fine. I think we will just have to make sure that he's not in any of the sequels, even if the movie kind of hints that he will probably be in the sequels. But I can at least say that he's not as much in this movie as I had expected. He's not really the protagonist. Greta Lee's character is actually more of the protagonist in the movie. The story mostly revolves around her, and I really appreciate that, because that means that we don't have to see this Diddler's ugly mug as much in this movie as was necessary. Hopefully even less so in the next movie. But I really like this movie. It's not quite as good as Legacy, as I just said, but I really liked it. I do hope that we get more of these, because I'm still skeptical about the box office turnout for this movie. But I think we will have more, hopefully, and they will be even better. Thank you. Good night, everyone, everywhere.